The first test is the active ankle dorsiflexion test. While kneeling, the client must see how far they can get their front foot from the wall in front of them while getting their front knee to hit the wall. The distance is calculated from the toes to the base of the wall. For the right ankle, the client was 8 centimeters away for a score of 2. The client must keep their front foot completely flat, and as you can see from the posterior angle, make sure their knee stays in line with their hip and ankle joints. The distance for the left ankle was 11 centimeters for a score of 3. Now in the passive test, the client should keep everything the same but keep their back knee off the ground. The distance for the right ankle was 10 centimeters for 2 points. Make sure that the knee doesn't fall to the left or right and that the client doesn't lead sideways with their torso. The distance for the left ankle was 13 centimeters for a score of 4. To start the shoulder flexion test, the client's C7 vertebrae was located via palpation and marked with a sticky note. Next, the client's hand was measured at 17.5 centimeters. Using a ruler, the landmarks for the scoring system were measured at half a hand length above and below the C7 vertebrae, even though the measurements are probably a bit off because the client extended their neck when being measured. In the active test, the client should make a fist with their thumb inside and try to reach down their back the best they can. The client should keep their shoulder from internally or externally rotating or laterally flexing their spine. For active right shoulder flexion, the distance measured below C7 was 7 centimeters, and the lowest part of the fist did not pass over half a hand length below C7, so it was scored a 3. The side view shows how the client's shoulder position is proper and relatively behind the line of the ear. In active left shoulder flexion, the distance was 12 centimeters below C7, good for a score of 4. In the passive test, the administrator applies extra force to the joint by pushing down the elbow. In this example, the push caused an increase in the curve in the cervical spine, which might have thrown off results. For the right shoulder, the distance was 10 centimeters for 3 points. For left passive shoulder flexion, the client's fist was 14 centimeters below C7, which led to a score of 4. In the active hip flexion test, the client should have one hand supporting their lower back to maintain a neutral curve, keep the non-testing leg on the ground, keep both knees straight, keep their head and neck flat on the ground, and make sure their feet and hips do not rotate medially or laterally. The active score for the left hip was 2. The score is measured based on the body landmark that the lateral malleolus passes. For the right hip, the score was 3. The landmarks include the kneecap, the midpoint of the thigh, which was measured between the kneecap and the ASIS by the administrator, and the ASIS. In the passive test, the administrator applies extra force to flex the hip until the client tells them they feel uncomfortable. The score for the left hip was a 3. For right passive flexion of the hip, the score was 3. However, all these results may be limited because the client had their ankle dorsiflexed instead of plantar flexed, which may have stretched the sciatic nerve more. To start the Y-balance reach test, the administrator measured the length of the client's leg from the lateral malleolus to the ASIS. This client's leg was 87 centimeters. In this test, you want to look at the position of the knee relative to the hip and ankle joint to see if there's loss in joint stability if the knee decides to deviate left or right. We were unable to capture a front view that best shows the knee position, but from the side it looks like the joint is relatively stable. It is also important for the client not to touch their foot on the ground as a break in between any of the movements for this test. Measurements for the right leg were 67 centimeters anterior, or relative reach of 77%, posterolateral 64 centimeters, or 74% relative reach, and 75 centimeters posteromedial, for a relative reach of 86%. The composite score was 78.9% relative reach. The left leg was measured at 87 centimeters as well. Measurements for when the left leg was in the air were 64 centimeters anteriorly for a 74% relative reach, 58 centimeters posterolaterally for a 67% relative reach, and 55 centimeters postomedially for a relative reach of 63%. The client was told to stand on a small marker placed on the ground, and all measurements for both legs were measured from the marker to the objects that were pushed. The overall composite score was 67.8% relative reach.
Question 1. There's a difference in the client's passive and active mobility. Their passive mobility is greater than their active mobility. This is demonstrated in a mobility test. In the left ankle, the passive test is 13 centimeters, while the active test is 11 centimeters. In the right ankle, the passive test is 10 centimeters, while in the active test it is 8 centimeters. In the left shoulder, the passive test is 14 centimeters, while the active test is 12 centimeters. In the right shoulder, the passive test is 10 centimeters, while the active test is 7 centimeters. In the left hip, the passive test scores a 3, while the active test scores a 2. In the right hip, the passive and active test scores a 3. Question 2. In my opinion, the client's mobility does influence their Y-balance test. In the mobility test, she has more mobility in their left ankle and right hip. In the active ankle test, the left ankle is measured as 11 centimeters, while her right ankle is 8 centimeters. In the active hip mobile test, the right hip has a score of 3, while the left hip scores a 2. In her Y-balance test, she has to flex her hips and dorsiflex her ankles to make a greater reach to the object. This is demonstrated perfectly within her Y-balance test, where the right side has a greater reach compared to the left side.
We're going to talk about the stability and mobility needs of client C, who just recently turned 73 and had a left knee replacement surgery. First, we're going to use the weight-bearing lunge test. This test assesses how well the ankle and knee function together. Client C will start small, around 6 centimeters from the knee to the toes, and gradually increase its distance as your knee strengthens. This will help us monitor the knee's range of motion while keeping them safe. Next is the straight leg raise. This will test hamstring flexibility and hip mobility, both of which are crucial after knee surgery. Improving these areas will help client C move more efficiently and avoid overloading the replaced knee. We'll also use a shoulder reach test to check upper body mobility. While their knee is the main focus, maintaining overall flexibility is important for everyday activities like reaching and balance. Finally, the lower quarter Y balance test will assess their leg stability. This is critical for preventing falls and boosting confidence in their movement as they get more active. We'll start slow and keep the range of motion controlled. By using these 4 tests, we can ensure client C's safe and gradual return to exercise by improving their mobility and post-surgery balance.